Okay, welcome everybody. This is our number 105 of our Let's Talk About sessions that we founded in COVID in 2012. And today the topic is Let's Talk About the Influence of Water on Making Wine in New York. I'd like to extend a welcome to our members and those joining for the first time, as well as our non-members. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Circle was founded in 1960 in the UK, and today we have 270 plus members, which comprise of wine writers, broadcasters, educators, and other professional communicators. We're based across the world, and today we've got 50% in the UK and over 50% outside of the UK, so quite a broad cross-section there. There's more information about joining the circle on our website, and also just to find out any other general information as you wish. What I'd like to do now is hand over to our chairman, Meg Maker, who will introduce our speakers today. Over to you, Meg.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think this is going to be a really fascinating topic. I was able to meet with the presenters last week and a little dry run, and I just find this topic incredibly fascinating. So, the total area of New York State is only about 55,000 square miles, which is not very large by US standards. It's about middling, really. It's about half, it's like midway in the list. But the territory is really varied, and it has inland mountains, rolling valleys, vast lakes, extensive coastline. And so today's guests are going to share their insights from two of these territories and discuss how water in particular, fresh water or salt, influences their viticulture. So we're going to hear first from Sebastian and Colleen Hardy, who make wine in the Finger Lakes, which is in the northern part of the state. Now, the couple met in Australia when Colleen, who is originally from upstate New York, took a job on the estate that Seb's third great grandfather, do I have that correct, founded in the Adelaide Hills in 1850. They still make wine there too, by the way, splitting their time between hemispheres. So Seb earned a degree in viticulture and enology from the University of Adelaide, and he did a 6-month program at Davis as well. And he's also worked vintages in Austria, France, and Italy. In the Finger Lakes, the couple farm vineyards adjacent to these vast bodies of water created by glaciation. And so they're going to be discussing the benefits and challenges of the lake's mesoclimate effects. And then next, we'll hear from Roman Roth, who's the winemaker and partner of Wolfer Estate, which is on the South Fork of Long Island. Roth grew up in Germany's Black Forest, and he trained there before taking positions in California, Australia, and Germany. He returned to Germany. He earned a master winemaker and cellar master degree from a College of Enology and Viticulture in Weinsberg, before then returning back to the United States in 1992 to become the winemaker at Wolfer. He's also partner there now. So Long Island's territory has also been richly affected by glaciation, but Wolfer's estate, lies just 2.5 miles from the Atlantic. So marine influences are also incredibly significant. So expect a geology lesson today. If there's anything super confusing while our speakers are presenting their PowerPoints, please drop that in the chat, and I'll interrupt and ask them to address that. But otherwise, just feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. And then at the end, we're hoping that we'll have 15 or 20 minutes of kind of joint conversation about the influences of water in these two very rich areas of New York State. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Colleen and Seb, and thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that introduction. So yes, I'm Colleen. I am the native New Yorker of Living Roots, whereas Seb, as will become obvious when he starts talking, is the Aussie half. And so I guess just to set the stage a little bit more for kind of where we're talking about, if we want to pull up a map of New York and kind of talk through the region that we're located in, also where Roman's speaking from. So, where we are in the Finger Lakes, sort of that middle section on the map where there are long, skinny lakes that resemble fingers. That's where we are making, our sparklings, our aromatic whites, certainly lighter reds, and where we're spending much of the year. So we're about, 5 hours northwest of New York City. We're, 4-ish hours south of Toronto, just across Lake Ontario. And, really interesting sort of part of America if you haven't had a chance to visit. So, where we're in driving distance to some really major cities, we have just a beautiful landscape, surrounding us in the Finger Lakes. So basically going back 2 million years ago to the Ice Age, and sort of glaciation peaking in New York more like 20,000 years ago. Glaciers basically came from the north and pushed south. And as they sort of started melting, they created what are now the Finger Lakes. So sort of carved these deep lakes, pushing, earth and rocks further south as they moved. So the Finger Lakes themselves were formed about 10,000 years ago. And, if we want to move to the next slide, as the glaciers sort of moved down and created the lakes, they left behind a lot of, as I say, rock, a lot of, decayed organic material, shells, salt beds, things like that. And then as those materials kind of broke down over time, it left us with the soils that we have now. And so, if we want to go to the next picture, that kind of shows the soils that we're working with in the Finger Lakes. This photo is taken from my family's vineyard, where we source a lot of our grapes for Living Roots. And they've named their vineyard Shale Creek because there is a pretty extreme creek running through the property with a large waterfall, which is not uncommon in the Finger Lakes. There's just amazing sort of fresh water, both in the lakes and kind of running through creeks, streams, waterfalls, and then these really sort of shale dominant soils. So tons of soil. When we were planting the vineyard and putting in drainage tiling, some of the guys working on the property were, pulling out these really massive pieces of shale while they were, putting in the drainage. And so we said, if there's some nice pieces of shale, can you just set them aside? We might want to use them for some rock walls or things like that around the property. And they called one day and said, we've got about 50 pallets of shale. Is that enough? We're like, yeah, I think that's enough. So just to give you a sense of, how much it was sort of left, in the soils and kind of what we're working with. So aside from the shale, sort of chalk, high lime and loam soils that we're working with. And so then kind of zooming in a little bit more on that map and looking at the Finger Lakes specifically. So there's 11 official Finger Lakes. There are some additional kind of small lakes that aren't kind of included in that 11. But they have, really varying sort of sizes, depths, elevations, and they have a real influence on the winemaking. So really these lakes are the reason that we're able to make wine in the Finger Lakes. But I'm going to pass it off to Seb to kind of delve into that a bit more.
Yes. Well, the three main lakes of the Finger Lakes for vinifera are the three central lakes. Colleen's family vineyard, sort of newer to the industry, but bought that 10 years ago, and we've been planting to vinifera. That's the little star at the bottom of the Y-shaped lake, Cuca Lake, that one's called. And then the middle lake is a big one for vinifera, Seneca, and then Cayuga Lake, also a big one on the eastern side. And then it's a bit spotted around of definitely natives and hybrids can be grown throughout the Finger Lakes, but certainly it's much easier and less risky if you're around those three central lakes. And if we could just go to the next slide, you'll see the Seneca and Cayuga lakes are the two deepest and really hold a lot of warmth that's throughout the season or throughout the year, and we'll talk more about the different times of year and the effect on the vines. And then for Cuca Lake, you see that that's the Y-shaped lake that our vineyard and new winery and tasting room are on. It has very much steeper slopes, which helps a lot for growing vinifera on that particular lake. Plus, there's the sort of the depth in the center that the sort of more flow that comes through that lake also helps it. And one key aspect is for the lakes not to freeze during the winter. That enables convection and that that warmth that we rely on for well, at least keeping the vines alive is a good start. And we just move on to now the next slide. So this is the view from our vineyard on Cuca Lake. So that's looking up the lake to the north. So so the glaciers pushed south. So we're on the near the end of that lake, and the center of the lake there is actually the bluff. So you see it actually branches off to the left and right of that central area. And we're actually we're one of the steepest vineyards. I'd say that photo doesn't quite portray it as well as it could. But that is we're on the southern side, which is where the steepness really kicks in, being where the glaciers pushed more of the sediment and the rocks. There are a lot of rocks that came, big, massive boulders of granite that came from Canada. So those are really cool features of the landscape. And yeah, as well as a bunch of other, that's where it really becomes a mix of different rocks and sediments, and a lot in layers depending on the height. We'd say we're more on the upper spectrum, the higher sort of elevation compared with others perhaps. You can be quite close to the lake and have more of the warmth given off, but then you can have perhaps a bit more risk of some frost sometimes settling. It really depends. The weather patterns are very variable in this area. Just keep continuing to talk about the different weather patterns, but and agriculture always, there's so much variability. We try and talk generalize to say something succinctly, but in the end it's really variable, especially in this area. Yeah, so in the spring, just when the vines are pushing out, there tends to be more of a frost risk in those lower lying areas, like I say, where the cold air settles. But especially when you get away from the lake, then that's the very high risk areas. So we have vinifera vines just on this property, as well as some sort of older native in an upper part of the area that so just any higher than our vineyard, it tends to get cooler and more risk of, especially the winter frosts, I'd say. Generally, we would have a low risk of frost in our particular vineyard, especially spring frost, because of the slope of the and the altitude of the vineyard. But certainly the water body really lends a bit of warmth during the growing season. And yeah, so if we move on to the next slide. So the summer, say the lakes aren't quite as warm. Well, they're definitely not as warm during the sort of earlier start of the season. So I'd say sort of more of the slope helps us with the spring frosts. But during the summer, there is a bit of a cooling effect. I'd say during summer, where we're talking about bodies of water, the more of the Great Lakes sort of and being those bigger bodies of water that are cool, give more of the macroclimate a bit more of a cooling effect. One other sort of water factor in the summer that we can't ignore is the having too much water, which isn't usually a problem that we come across too often in South Australia during the growing season. The vines generally like some water and perhaps deeper in the soils where evaporation's low. It can be great, but then in the Finger Lakes and all of our sort of northern New York area, during the summer we have quite a lot higher rainfall that can cause water logging or wet feet, you'd say, wet roots that vines don't like. So having good drainage, and again, the slopes from the glacial calving really help drainage. So we also have huge gorge and different creeks that run through the property, like Colleen was saying. One of those first photos, beautiful photo of the trickling waterfall creek showing the shower and a boulder. That was from this property. That was the Shower Creek that this is named off of. And there's actually a 40-foot staggered waterfall on the property just below us. So that really helps the water drainage and so the vines don't have too much water. Plus the tiling or the tubes to drain water under the vineyard that we put in when first planting the vinifera were a good
very important
very
in
important.
our
Yes.
in this region with a lot of rainfall.
That's right, and depending on the soil profile, so some areas have a lot of gravel. Maybe an area just slightly lower latitude to us is more gravelly soil. We have lots of rocks which help the drainage, but more clay in the soil, which could be good for holding the water when we do have longer periods without the rainfall. But the gorge also and those creeks, but definitely the gorge and along with the slopes helps the cool air of the frost settle down, and that's another aspect that I could have mentioned there in the spring aspect. The deep gorges sort of pulling out that cool those cool conditions, and also another important aspect of why we have more rainfall on the eastern states is because of the Gulf of Mexico, way far south of us. There is such a large, shallow body of water with warm tropical conditions, causing a lot of evaporation, and that causes and produces a lot of storms throughout the season that especially creates a lot of humidity and therefore potential rainfall. And as you go north, you have less of that from wherever, Texas, Florida. You know, as you travel up the East Coast, you have more of the storms having dropped more of their or precipitated and diminished, but we still have those humid conditions that come through in the summer, which can provide some good sort of rainfall sort of through the season. So we don't have vines that are too stressed, which I think helps more of the whites, especially where a bit more vine health and can help So, very healthy vines, I'd say. Now we could go through to the next in the autumn, which ideally more of the storms diminish and towards the end of the season tends to dry off a bit more, which can help with lower humidity and lower potential for disease, although there is still higher disease pressure. So it is really important with those sort of the higher rainfall and whatnot to have really good airflow through the canopies, so that we do a lot more canopy management and leaf plucking and vertical shoot positioning, VSP sort of vine training, and really getting sunlight onto the bunches, which is softer sun than say we get in Australia, where we might go for a little bit of coverage on the fruit, a little bit of speckled light of the leaves perhaps, whereas here we don't have a stronger sun and we can get a bit more sunlight on the bunches for riper flavors. And also, importantly for this sort of conversation, canopies and fruiting zones that dry out quickly after those rains to lower the disease pressure. And the larger bodies of water hold more of that heat from the summer, especially, that can help extend the growing season. And on to winter. Now, especially for during the winter, again the slopes help a lot for us, having the gullies, draining the cold air, and then the convection of the warmth of the lakes that generally don't freeze, those bigger ones, Keuka and Seneca and Cayuga. And again, this is talking vinifera. If you're outside of those areas, there are plenty of hybrids and natives that you could plant outside of the valleys or the banks of the Finger Lakes. And also we have way less precipitation in the Finger Lakes, and I'd say even the southern part of the Finger Lakes, where it is a bit more hilly, and just south of us we have and west of us some larger hills, mountains, and that help drop more of the rainfall before us, so a little more of a rain shadow. And also just north of us in the Great Lakes area, you have more rainfall and more snow because of the Great Lakes.
So like Lake Ontario, especially for us.
Yeah, and a lot of that is coming from those Great Lakes that are west of us. A lot of you'd call it the lake effect snow, but this also happens in winter as well, in summer, sorry, as well, and other times of the year. You'd have more rainfall there, which is better to avoid in general for here. Although there are, you have pros and cons of each wine region, and it often you'd say that maybe it's the strengths of your weaknesses and weaknesses of your strengths. So yeah, and different varietal selection and all that can make the most of different conditions. But there is one vineyard that we source from Lake Ontario, and they don't well, they actually like more of the snow up there during winter for the blanketing effect and the insulating that can give. But there are the downsides of more rainfall and perhaps more snow in that particular area. And
that covers it on seasonality.
Yes, so
I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. You know, we kind of wanted to talk through kind of what that means year round for us. So hopefully that was informative for you.
Yes, in an overview, a quick overview of a lot of
but happy to answer questions at the end. Here again is just another view of kind of, you know, our winery tasting room, kind of looking up Cuba Lake towards the north. And so, yeah, we just opened this in September. So we're definitely, you know, we started making wine in 2016 for Living Roots. So still on the newer side. But, you know, I think one of the things about being in sort of new world winemaking and, you know, certainly in on the East Coast, New York State is there's a lot of exciting new things happening, a lot of new styles of wine being explored. And yeah, we are really, you know, feel lucky to be making wine in this region. And, you know, as we briefly mentioned, you know, focusing on things like sparklings, aromatic whites, some lighter, more elegant reds. We do a pretty full range of styles from New York, and then focus a little bit more on our sort of bigger reds over in Australia. But yeah, being in this sort of cool but really dynamic region, there's a lot of variety in the styles. So we're, you know, working with things more traditional varieties like Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, Cab Franc, but also lots of hybrids, as Seb mentioned. So things like Marquette or Aramella, Treminette. There's so much that we can grow really well because of the lakes. So we yes, we owe it all to the lakes themselves.
Yeah, glaciers and yeah, what it did to the land. And I'm gonna say on the just to speak briefly, and I don't know how we're going for time, but yeah,
hand it over to Roman soon.
Yeah, but the hybrids are not something that I expected to like when coming over here, but I found treating them differently in both the vineyard and winery, and really going for quality and having an open mind of changing the production techniques, and a lot of these have been overcropped and not made for premium wine, and to have been made in styles that or in ways that I think well, there's a lot of improvements happening in that area, and even if they are in a low disease pressure area, I think they can be great in reducing inputs, low sprays, and that a lot of the, well, as well as phylloxera, the mildews came from this area on the whole, so and those trouble vineyards all around the world, so they're great, and then sparklings, which may have mentioned, but that was a massive pull for me here. Something that you don't need to push ripeness too much, and the cooler climate where you have good flavor ripeness at low potential alcohol, including our session range, which is anything under 10%, which you just can't do for sparklings or these session wines that we've introduced in Australia, or you know, even in cooler area of the Adelaide Hills. Even if we're going for sort of elegant early harvest there. Yeah, that gives us a broader overview. Thank you.
Cheers.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much. There were a couple of questions, and I think maybe we could just roll them together at the end if we would. And then so I guess without further ado, we could move on to Roman. Roman Roth. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, hello, welcome everybody. I will put on my best Long Island accent for you. I'm since 32 years the winemaker and partner at Wolfer Estate. We are in the Hamptons. You can see the map where we just talked the Finger Lakes. We are all the way down on the south side of New York. It's a huge state. It's a beautiful agricultural state. People know Wall Street and stuff in Manhattan, which is, you can see New York City there, the little dot at the bottom. And we are basically 100 miles, 90 miles east from New York City, from Manhattan. So great agricultural state. New York, of course, is a very discerning market, so only the best will do. So it is a very tough market to make placements and to hold your own place and break prejudice, basically. That it has to be, you know, from Chateau Latour and from the great wine regions of the world. And sometimes the region right in front of your door can make world-class wine, but it takes a while to get that across. So that's something we've been on a mission on for many years now, and I think it's working. People, as the vineyards get older, and I'm getting blonder and blonder, the wines get better and better. So we do the next slide. And this is actually a nice picture of Long Island. You see the sound between Connecticut and Long Island. You see the bay between the North Fork and the South Fork, between the two fingers at the end. And then you see the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean at the bottom. And quite nice, you see all this little hazy stuff around it. The entire Long Island was formed by this glacier 20,000 years ago, these huge ice sheets. So all the soil that's missing in that made the Finger Lakes basically is now sitting probably right here around Long Island and somewhere south. So it is amazing how this whole island was formed in basically a huge glacier. If you go to the next slide, this is just a quick picture of the South Fork and the North Fork in detail. There's 3 wineries on the South Fork in the Tony Hamptons, which I get later into it. Of course, it helps to have great location. Location is everything in real estate. And if you have a great place where you have lots of visitors, that certainly helps to showcase special things that you make. And on the North Fork, there are more vineyards there. There are up to 50 vineyards now. The main reason there's basically less vineyards in the South Fork is because in the Hamptons, the land is 4 times more expensive, I would say. But the real reason is that when they were potato farm, this was all potato and cornfields, that the soil on the South Fork is the Bridgehampton loam, which is a richer soil. It's one of New York's, one of the great soils in America. And on the North Fork, mainly is the Haven loam. And I'll go into details about that later. But basically, on the lighter soil, you had maybe half the amount of potatoes that you could grow. And so that's why those potato farmers went bankrupt first and sold their land to real estate people and who knows what. And that's why you see more vineyards basically there than you see on the South Fork. So the next slide. Again, there's 3 great things that we have. It's the Bridgehampton loam, fabulous soil, has good water holding capacity, great drainage. I have a more detailed picture about it in a bit. Then we have this maritime influence, and I go into detail what's so special that is that we have this fantastic, no winter damage, no spring frosts. In the summer, it gets cooler, which slows down our ripening curve and gives us this elegant, one of the most food-friendly wines in America as a result. And moderate alcohol levels. You get our top red wines, that can age 30 years, but they have 13.5 volume percent. Where do you find that in a hot climate these days? And part of this unique situation is that our latitude is the same as Madrid and Naples. We're much further south than French or German vineyards. And this unique combination of intense sun ripens the seeds, ripens the skins, great photosynthesis, and the ocean breeze slows down the ripening, gives us a long maturity, which gives you, I think, that's the key for texture, for structure, for great wines, and yet balance is sort of the crux, the soil, the ocean, and the latitude. So we can do the next slide. Again, the soil. So this is all this silt that was shaved off from Canada all the way down, coming here to New York, basically, has landed, made these huge moraines. There were 2 major periods that formed Long Island, but the biggest part of the Ice Age was in 20,000 years ago. But the nice thing is this is on top of gravelly sand. So we have excellent drainage. So the roots don't sit in moist water soil or whatever. So that's a key. But good water holding capacity, great mineral retention and uptake as a result by the vines. So you can have healthy vines. So it's a fantastic soil to grow grapes and to get through the up and downs. When you have drought, you can have drought months. You can have a month with wetter rain. So this gives us a very steady shoot growth. And I think that's key important to when we farm sustainable on the estate. And this even shoot growth is key. When you have very light soil, you have either drought stress immediately or you have too much water. And so shoot growth can be very sporadic. And if you have a similar good water holding capacity, and there's no stress, and there's obviously not too much water in the soils, you have this nice and steady shoot growth. Next slide. I love this slide. This is the Laurentide ice sheet. When you look on the right side, you see the bottom one so basically 20,000 years ago. Can you imagine there was a 2,000 feet ice sheet on top of Manhattan? It's unimaginable. Taller than the Empire State Building was this monster ice sheet, and there was much less water in the ocean. Then by around 15,000, huge melting starts to happen. There was basically that you saw the first water area between Connecticut and Long Island. That used to be a glacial lake. And then finally, all the ice sheet melted, the ocean rose up, and that's when that glacial lake got connected with the Atlantic, and so as a result, Long Island was formed. So quite amazing, just 20,000 years ago, 2,000 feet of ice on top of us, but it created this beautiful soil at this beautiful Long Island. So that's enough of my glacial talk. Next slide, please. So again, now I go very quickly in detail. This maritime influence is the key. Hot climates can only dream of having a cool ocean breeze, especially, the warmer the climate has, the more climate change is happening, the warmer and hotter and drier it has gotten. And to have this wonderful sea breeze. So it literally is cooler in the Hamptons. That's why people come from the whole East Coast to the Hamptons, because it is cooler. And so that gives us our unique ripening pattern. Next slide. Latitude I mentioned. I mean, who would have thought, that Long Island is the same as Madrid and Spain. So you get easily sunburned when you go out to the beach here. And so this gives us this beautiful ripening on our seeds, and just perfect first of all, it makes you happy when you have good sun. And secondly, it's great for the grapes and for the vines. So the next slide. Little bit of interesting is the growing degree days, just to show you, like where the Hunter Valley in Australia, Champagne, Napa Valley, Long Island the average is 3,224 average growing degree days. So we are certainly, I always like to say, Long Island is literally in the middle between Bordeaux and Napa. Our climate has very often been compared with Bordeaux, but there is something very unique and different about it, and that's what we want to feature. We don't want to be like Bordeaux, and we certainly don't want to be like Napa. And I think that gives us, and now, again, 20 years ago, when people only liked big, fat Californian wines, cough syrup red wines, and we make elegant, concentrated, powerful red wine. So it took a while to overcome this prejudice, but you can see where we're going to have a better slide, which also shows we've gotten warmer. This is a slide, actually should have been next, but it's fine. This is precipitation, rainfalls. Those really big spikes is when we get a hurricane remnant. The last direct hurricane we had in 1991 was the last direct, but we've gotten a couple of hurricanes. It doesn't mean that you have a great vintage or a bad vintage, even when you get a fair amount of rain during the growing season. Just to give you a quick overall, from my history, I'm being 32 years here now, I've had 20 fabulous vintage. You can argue there was maybe 8 absolute dream vintages. So 20 great vintages, 8 vintages that were average, which were happy average vintages. That's 77.8%. And we had 8 vintages that were either on the cool or on the very rainy side, which is 22 vintages. So that, I think, there's a really good percentage anywhere in the wine in the world when you have 77.8, 78% of great vintages that you can build your reputation on. And then, of course, I'm more proud in the difficult years. Everybody can make good wines in a good year, but the key is to make great wines in a tricky year. And I think that's one of the specialties we do. The next one is this is overlaying the growing degree days and the precipitation. And there's 2 things. I should have made a line, but you can see it's getting warmer. We are even we beat Napa Valley, for example, in 2017, the average growing degree days in 2011. It's getting warmer. And for some reason, actually, the rainfalls have gone down. But the intensity of the rainfall has increased. So that is an unusual dynamic. In general, we've gotten less rain than the last 20 years ago, but we get more intense rainstorms now, which can cause a problem. So you really have to be on top of your game when it comes to canopy management and being on top of your vineyard. So we can do the next slide. So this is what I mean. When you look at our vineyards, Some people say we grow topiaries because of the humidity and because you have to be really on top of it, so you have really low disease pressure, because just in case you get a hurricane remnant in August, you can take it. You can take a punch. You can take 2 punches. But if you already skipped corners, oh, it looks like a good year. Let's just, have huge umbrellas, have a bushy plant which harbors more moisture, gives more disease pressure. Well, then you are in deep trouble. And so our vineyards are immaculate. If you ever come and visit, they're just very proud of our vineyard team. Shoot positioning, 15 leaves per cluster positioning. And I think a lot of people on Long Island are doing this, and certainly at Wolf, we're really trying to make it perfect. So very proud of the vineyard team, and that's again because of humidity and because of there's a danger of a hurricane risk. We keep this very tight vineyard management. Next slide. So again, what does that mean? When you have great vineyard management, you have less disease pressure. This very open canopy where you can see people 3-4 rows down. In most vineyards, if you would stand on the other side of the vineyard, you wouldn't see me anymore. In our vineyards, they are very open, and you have sunlight going into the canopy. Famous book, Sunlight into Vines, if you ever read it. And it results in that we have now 110 days, 111 days actually on average, from mid-flowering to mid-maturity. 20 years ago, it used to be 120 and a half days. So it's gotten warmer. We pick now 10 to 14 days earlier. Nevertheless, it's 111 days from mid-flowering to mid-maturity. And that gives us ripe seeds, ripe skins, great aromas. The cool sea breeze protects our aromas. So there is wonderful mixture between wonderful aromatic grapes and intense grapes. And as a result, Long Island can do many different varieties. 100%, 99.5% is vinifera on Long Island. But we can do wonderful Gewürztraminer, whites, Riesling even, Chardonnay, obviously, Pinot Gris, Tokai Friulano, and Semillon do really well. And we can do Cab Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, and Malbec. Even the last 10 years have really stepped up to the plate where we can make intense and wonderful world-class wines with this climate now, with the change. So the next picture. Now I just go in a couple of more things. So winemaking is, we work quite traditional. The nice thing in America, you're allowed to grow Chardonnay next to Merlot. So I always say Bordeaux would make nice Chardonnay, but they're not allowed. So we have the freedom here to do in some ways what you want, yet we restrict ourselves and put very traditional limits on ourselves, keeping wines, long skin macerations, 22 months in oak and French oak, long lease contacts, those kinds of things. So it's nice to be our own, in some ways, limiting our own winemaking ability to tradition, to things, but also have an eye to open technology and new technologies in modern winemaking. Next slide. And then back to, we are on the ocean. So my goodness, we get lots of people. It is amazing. And this allows us to do specialty things because you reach customers that are looking for special things. And so this is just our tasting room. This is actually the back room for this, in this case, for wedding. The next slide, just rush through these slides now. We do a wonderful wine stand, Sunset Fridays. 800 people come every Friday. It's just wild, very casual. So we don't want to be stiff. Great ratings. Yep, next slide is good. We have broken the glass ceiling. We've gone many, many times over 90, up to 94 plus points. Again, what does it mean at the end? It's again, while everything is still new and while Long Island is still trying to break the prejudice and sets itself as one of the great wine regions, or New York as one of the great wine regions in the world, it does help when you get great ratings. And then I think one more slide. We also make a lot of lifestyle brands, like we have Summer in a Bottle. It's become a cult wine, a rosé, very pretty bottle. But we treat it serious, our rosé. We make a dry rosé. We never treated it like a garbage can. So only from some of our best vineyards, we use the grapes to make a great rosé, and it's not an afterthought or a byproduct. So, and I think that's why we've broken, again, the glass ceiling with this wine. We make over 100,000 cases of rosé now at Wolf Estate. So it's really become something that people are proud of. And it's and ultimately it leads people to taste our top whites and our top red wines. And I think that's it. One more slide, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Roman. That was fascinating. It was a great complement to the discussion of geology and glaciation in the Finger Lakes as well. I think, it's really different territories, and we've had some comments about that. We do have some questions. And Michelle Padberg, you had one particular question, I think, for Colleen and Seb. I don't know if you'd like to unmute, and maybe Colleen and Seb, you can unmute if you'd like to ask your question. If she's still there, is Michelle Padberg still with us? I think she may have left. The question she had was about winter freeze damage and what you might do to mitigate winter freeze damage. She's heard about LED light strings and other kinds of wires in the vineyard for cold damage. Do you do anything like that?
No, not at this stage. Yeah, that's another thing I'll have to look into. There's not. It is almost impossible to do anything on a commercial sort of commercial sort of point. We, especially being in an area that is hard to, we're putting so much into the viticulture, lower yields compared with most other sort of producers, let's say in the Finger Lakes and things like that, that to have really outstanding quality. And so it is sort of hard to put keep putting more back into the vineyard, or especially that, we'd focus on say not using herbicides and spending more time sort of undervine mowing and weed whacking, and so yeah, we focus more of our energy in that sort of way and just rely on site selection, and also leaning into that, healthy vines become more resistant. So that's important. Also, the lower yields can help by harvesting a little earlier and leaving enough energy in the vines for them to lignify quicker. So the resistance to winter damage is heightened when you have proper lignification, and the more yield plus the weaker the vine, the longer it takes for those vines to harden off and then reach their maximum winter hardiness. So those are sort of the key things for us. And as I say, the site selection being near one of the bigger lakes, good slope, and trying to avoid those areas for vinifera that level off at all. Yeah, those are key.
So you're saying it's a cambium layer that's it lignifies before that, like that season's growth layer? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the sort of lignification that happens during the season and the end of the season, but then there's the real sort of deep lignification and hardening off that is key to having good winter hardiness.
What are some of the oldest vine ages in the Finger Lakes region?
Well, it depends. More of the vinifera is only since the 70s, but it has been a big area for hybrids and natives before that. So on our property, I mentioned we kept some of the native, and that is Elvira, and that's from the 40s. So it's a good bit of history. We pick it so early. Well, it's not just Labrusca like a lot of the other natives, but it's a Riparia Labrusca cross, so technically American hybrid, and that was used a lot pre-prohibition and resulted in some of the sparkling. So there was a lot of sparkling wine produced in the traditional method in the Finger Lakes, and most of it was on Cuca Lake where we are. And those actually, there were gold medals won in Champagne for that. But really the Prohibition put an end to that. And by the time the states had come out of Prohibition, there was a lot of, well, palates had changed to more sort of fortifieds and rich sweetness, boozy sort of wine styles. Sure, there's more fruitiness still to those, but we're picking them so early. And for those Elvira wines, those are a portion of it, and are picked with those are for our session range, which is anything from 7 to 10% alcohol. And you when you're picking that early, I mean the acidity is through the roof. So and we're not ones we don't add sugar or acid or deacidify. So we blend just portions of that with some of our session wines to have them lower alcohol, and those are generally our style is dry. And then there's the hybrids, which I'd say that the more common nowadays for especially on the area on the whole. There's way more hybrid and native, whether it's for wine or or grape juice. They're planted in the Finger Lakes, but the key areas, the best areas, would often go to vinifera, where they can survive the winters well and get all those benefits that I talked about throughout the growing season, to make high quality vinifera wines.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Neil, it sort of segues into Neil's question about just what grapes that you're working with at Living Roots. Actually, I'd like to hear from Roman as well. You mentioned, the Merlot and Chardonnay, but I'd like to know what fruit you're all working with. Neil, do you have a specific question?
No, they started to answer it, but a little more detail would be appreciated.
Yeah, Riesling is our most widely planted and I'd say our best white vinifera for the area. And it really depends sort of year to year and definitely winery to winery. As I say, yield is an important one for high quality. But definitely for us, I'd say Riesling is our most consistent vinifera. And then for the hybrids, I'll stay with vinifera for the moment. Cab Franc is, I'd say, the best red vinifera for the area. Gets a nice sort of fleshy body, and especially getting more sunlight on the bunches reduces herbal aspects. So you can sort of dial in with the how much herbal varietal character you might want. I've always been a fan of a little bit. We pluck the leaves generally much more on the side getting the morning sun, the softer, and then have just a little more leaf area on the area that gets the afternoon sun. So those are important for, and then also Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris are ones that we do a bit of, sparklings from Chardonnay, and Riesling, and Pinot Noir. The Pinot Noir, I'd say the disease pressure is a little high for that, being such tight bunches, and you really have to put a lot into it, and they can be a bit more variable. So there isn't as much of that done around the Finger Lakes on the whole. And then for hybrids, loving some of the recent ones from the no spray program of the local university, Cornell, and other ones from around this area. That now that it's gotten to a lot of them would be the 50th cross, and a lot of time, the last 100 years sort of developing those. Plus other ones like Vidal, which has been around for a long time, but has been proven to not have the sort of super fruity, foxy characters. But it really depends on the particular variety. There's so much diversity in there. Some of these newer ones might be Aramella from the No Spray program of Cornell, and floral and really high disease pressure. High disease tolerance. And now that they've mapped the genome of the grapevine, that's also another thing that's sped up the selection process. So again, there's no GMO or anything. It's just the old crosses, but the selection is a lot quicker, and they can
Plant breeding, in other words. Exactly.
plant breeding. Yes.
Yeah, plant breeding.
It's really
Long Island. On Long Island, it would be the red varieties, Merlot and Cap Franc, do extremely well, get powerful, big vines, can ripen fully. And the whites is Chardonnay, and now Sauvignon Blanc is really taking off the last couple of years. And then you have all the different vinifera's, from Gewürz to Riesling to Syrah, Malbec. I mean, many different varieties do extremely well. Some of them take a little bit more canopy work, like Sebastian has mentioned. Like Pinot Noir, I've made the best wines I've ever made in my life. Pinot Noir from Long Island. But you wouldn't want to have a huge percentage. It's fine to risk 3-4 acres and make 400-500 cases of fabulous wine. And if you see the weather is not really playing along to bring these thin-skinned grapes to the end, well, then pick them early and make a nice, elegant rosé with it, blend it in the rosé. So you have to be flexible. I'm a flexible German, I always say. So in any case, so those are the main 4 varieties: Merlot, Cap Franc, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, thank you. And Graham Harding had a question about just how long vinifera has been in the Finger Lakes, and I guess I would actually add in Long Island as well. Graham, did you want to make a?
I mean, obviously, Sebastian has really answered quite a lot of that already, but I heard from him three dates, pre-prohibition, then the 1940s, and then the 1970s. And I just wonder whether there's a sort of a broader answer, if you like, to that. And I also wondered whether in their conditions, the Finger Lakes conditions, whether you need to graft onto local rootstocks.
Yes, we definitely do. Like most places in the world, except for, say, South Australia and Chile. Although in South Australia, we would maybe more recently do it for other reasons other than phylloxera, like for whether more sort of drought tolerance or whatnot. But yes, in the Finger Lakes, yes, we definitely do it for phylloxera because that's all over. And it wasn't properly understood that the vine vinifera could survive well here because it had been thought that it got too cold throughout the area. But it was really because people weren't planting on rootstocks. So yeah, Dr. Franks was the first, and he was from Georgia, and came over and realized that they got colder winters there and the vines survived. So yeah, he really kicked it off in the 70s. And then and it went from more natives in pre-prohibition to more hybrids and improving hybrids in sort of more post-prohibition, to a bit of a mix, but more so vinifera and hybrids nowadays.
It's a lot of prejudice. Again, you can grow great grapes in New York, even in England, you can grow grapes. And in the future, in Scandinavia and in Russia and in Canada, and the hot climates will be struggling. So I rather take water over drought and fire any day. And so that's one thing we have on the East Coast. We got plenty of rain. You have to make very neat canopy management. That's why big companies don't like it, because it's too much work, too much detail. But when you put the detail in, you can make world-class wine with this in the future and now in this cooler climates, that have plenty of sun and good water.
Great, thank you.
Well, we're at time here. I think we probably should wrap up. Thank you very much to both of our all three of our presenters, and to you, Eleanor, for so aptly running the slides.